by and large, when you're doing training, when you're conducting a training course, you're trying to change the behavior of the people in that audience, right? Whether that behavior is what they say or what they do, you're trying to create some type of change in that group. But when we look at change management theory, we tend to skip over a pretty critical point, which is what are the barriers to that, in this case, person, could also be a system, but in this case, person, adapting to that change. And so, for example, do they agree with you? Is a really good first question.
That's a really great first question. Yeah.
And so looking at it that way, your first job isn't usually to convey new information. That's part of it. You have to do that, of course. But it's conveying it in a way that is convincing a group of people to change their mindset about something in the way you want them to change it. Those are two very different, very, very different things. And so I'll use somewhat of a good current example, broadly speaking, which is this ongoing discussion we have about diversity and inclusion and social justice. If you're building training on, say, implicit bias, and you're coming in there and just explaining what you know about implicit bias and what you think needs to change about implicit bias, and you're not trying to sort of bridge that connection with the audience that you're talking to and convince that audience that that's what they should be doing, you're not doing enough, right? It may make you feel better. You may be checking a box in having conducted the training, but if it didn't cause the outcome that you want it to cause, then you've not accomplished the goal of what you were there to do in the first place. So that, I think, is the starting point for the discussion, is what are you trying to accomplish? And if that accomplishment is change, what's standing in the way of that adaptation? And what do you have to do with that audience to get past it?
Some people listen to that and hear that argument and they say, oh, are you telling me I need to be a sales rep? And my answer is yes, you are selling this. Like, you're not selling a car, but you're trying to, anytime you try to change somebody's behavior, it's not, we use manipulation as like this negative term. What we're trying to do is convince them through every skill set we have, positive skill set we have, not coercion or anything like that, but to say, hey, like, what you're doing doesn't necessarily work. And the car salesman analogy is actually kind of a funny one to use, because if you notice, if you go buy a car, a really great car salesman, well, when you drive back into the lot after testing that new car and you have this emotional attachment to your older car, they'll have you park next to your old car. You're like, oh man, I really like my car. I know I don't have a payment on it. And like all of a sudden you drive up and you're like, you've been sitting in air conditioned seats and like it has all leather and all this stuff. And you look over and your car has scratches on it. And, it's like FEMA sucks painted on the side. I don't know, something ridiculous. But like you have like this crappy car and you're like, oh, right. Like this is why I like it. And that's kind of what has to happen in these meetings sometimes, is we have to peel back the layers and say, this is what you could have. This is what you're doing. And you have to address that in kind of frank terms with them. You have to understand their culture and where they're coming from. But if they don't even want to agree with you, they literally are going in there to check a box and saying, like, I did training, right?
100%.